we've been talking about the sacred feminine mysteries, and also how in our part one we dug into menopause as a magical transformation, and how that manifests both in the somatic and the quantum levels. And so definitely check out that episode. And now I brought her back to go deep into sacred sexuality. This is a topic that I've been interested in forever. My sexual CPR course came on in 2011 online, and this a sense of understanding our feminine energy, the power of orgasm, and the energy that comes with it, because everything that we can do to build more oxytocin, I'm all about oxytocin, is powerful, but also reclaiming our sexual vitality post menopause. What does that look like? How does it feel? Another aspect that I really liked in Seren's work is the vulva, because I've got julva for the vulva, and I consider that really sacred anatomy, sacred female anatomy, and how important that is. But there's a mysticism to the vulva that has transcended, millennia. And I wanted to touch on that too, because it's not a time, menopause is not a time to shut down, it's a time to open up and reconnect. And certainly the sacred vulva is part of that too. So, welcome, Seren, back to the Girlfriend Doctor Show.
Good to be here again.
All right, we've got a lot to talk about, and a couple things, want to talk about when we talk about sacred sexuality. When you've written about this, that connection of our own, um, a, our own awakening of sexuality, our own awakening of our female sexuality, and then also the concept of, the mysticism around the vulva. Would
Yes.
love you to weigh in on this.
Okay. I think for me, the big revelation in my journey came is that, growing up in the world and the culture I had, there were no conversations about sacred or magical sexuality or the mystical magic of a woman's body. And so sexuality felt like it was presented as something that happened with someone else, in essence, right? And so from the get go, you're in a realm or a conversation where it feels like it's not actually about you. It's about this thing that you do with someone else, or you give to someone else, or you perform for someone else. And so for me, the first kind of step in sacred feminine sexuality is to reclaim the knowing that your sexual energy is yours. It's not something that belongs to anyone else or has to happen with anyone else. It's yours. And so you can start to create a sacred container around this aspect of who you are and your feminine energy. And so I feel like that's like this really beautiful place to start, this like sexual sovereignty. And then how I progressed with that is that I, in my late 20s, developed really bad endometriosis and had very painful menstruation and did not experience like deep sexual pleasure. I didn't even have a context or a language for it. Again, it was just something that kind of randomly happened with someone else, maybe after you'd had some wine. There was like no context for a sacred or a kind of almost ceremonial. So this was for me the first
And
part.
even associated with pain, likely,
Pain,
right? Like, and
exactly.
if you have pain every time you do something, why would you want to?
Yeah, or just numbness. Actually, for me, there was pain when I bled, but for me, I didn't really have pain, sexually, but it manifested more as just numbness. And then and that numbness then manifests as low desire. Because, like, why do you wanna do something that does you don't really feel anything?
Yeah.
And then you're reading stories of other people having these epic orgasms or experiences, and you're like, "What are they on?" Or, "Are they lying?" All these questions. So for me, it was like to start to sanctify this area of my body as a sacred site. So literally, I think of it like this, and I now know through all the research I did for womb awakening that this is how our ancestors thought about a woman's body, a woman's womb, a woman's pelvis, a woman's vulva. This whole area was as a very sacred site, a sacred ceremonial site. And like any sacred ceremonial site, there are different places in the sacred ceremonial site that hold different essences or different kind of magical signatures. So by kind of sanctifying this part of me and exploring it as my own and my own magic, how I could awaken my own magic, I started to open this field of energy. And I feel like, when we think about orgasmic energy, it's not just like an end product of an event. It's actually a state of consciousness. It's
Mhm.
a way of being. It's this like primal undulation in life. It's like this pulsation. It's like being in tune with this pulse of life that is naturally very pleasurable. And as I discovered, like even pain pulses. So, like if you've ever had a toothache, it pulses.
Mm.
And so I discovered this with my very painful periods because I was going through some like deep cycles of healing my womb. And at the end of that, I decided that I didn't want to take painkillers. I wanted to be a completely like let my body's intelligence. And so the first time I got my moon cycle where I'd made this commitment, like I'm not going to use painkillers. And I'd been working with herbs and practices with the moon. I had such bad period pains, like I would want to pass out. So, and it was luckily a Saturday, and so I lay on my bed and the blood started. It was so painful because the pain is a contraction where the pulse, it's like it's stuck, it's not going into the pulse. So I just started to breathe into my womb and just be with the sensation of the pain. And what I discovered is that when I stayed with it with my breath and my awareness, that pain started to open out. And at first it wasn't pleasurable. I just noticed that the pain was now like pulsing. And so I could start to breathe with that pulse. And I was there
Like
for,
a contraction.
yeah, exactly. And and it's like high sensation. And I think sometimes we make the mistake of thinking pleasure is always like nice. Like often pleasure is high sensation that we have the capacity to hold with our body and our nervous system and our somatic intelligence. So again, at first it was like opening myself to this high sensation actually of the pain pulsing. So now it's not just this stuck, numb, contracted pain. It's like this pulsation that I'm riding like a wave, like kind of like a really bad toothache, but in my womb. But over time, so I did this for 3 hours. And of course, I started to shift consciousness like a psychedelic, like a medicine journey. And then by
Or a BDSM journey, I'm saying. I'm like, "That's pain," right?
yeah, exactly. Pain has this signature. It's like so much of life is created from this sacred duality of pain, pleasure, agony, ecstasy. And at the end of it, this pulsation became pleasure. It became and then and this is the trick. We think it's hard to sit with our pain. It's harder to sit with our pleasure. So I could
Wow.
sit with
Yeah.
the pain, I could expand my bandwidth, my nervous system to be like, I'm not going to get up, I'm not going to numb out, I'm not going to stop this, I'm going to ride this wave. But when the wave became the pleasure, that was more difficult to really work with that wave of pleasure, because then the pleasure starts to build. And be clear in this conversation, I was not physically touching myself. I'm just lying down and breathing as my womb is bleeding. And so
You
that was,
were breathing and opening up energetic blocks,
yeah,
opening up
exactly,
that.
energetic blocks. And I think that there's a place for both, because we have our stories, our mental stories, but when you're at that level of somatic kind of layers, there's no story to it. It's just energy that has stuck or numbed out, and just letting it move again. And so I discovered that at the end of that, it's like, this pulse of life is high sensation, and it can bring us pain or pleasure. And we have to develop the capacity to sit with it. But it's actually, as a woman, more difficult to have the capacity to hold vast states of pleasure. And so then I noticed this years later. So that was, I was just going through my Saturn's return. So, like, fast forward 14
So that
years.
was 28 years old.
Yeah. So fast forward, like, maybe 14 years after that, I was holding, in essence, a womb mystery school, holding lots of women. And what I noticed is that when we went through the sections where we were looking into shadows and pain, and they on the majority could do it. But when the pleasure section came in, when the ecstasy, the bliss, the beauty, the capacity was a lot smaller. That women were a lot more numbed out to
Wow.
receiving pleasure than they were pain. So I really feel like that is, like, I call it a sadhana. A sadhana means a spiritual practice, and it means a commitment to keep doing something as a habit, even if in the day to day it doesn't always feel good. It's like a spiritual purpose. So I really feel like for women to alchemize this pain and alchemize this contraction, but then also to say, how are we going to alchemize or open these pathways of pleasure? And and it is very hormonally dependent. And the way I see it is, I feel like our hormones are spiritual feminine intelligences.
Well, it's even called hormones. And the root word "hor," will you explain that?
Yes.
HOR?
So whore it's just literally another word for womb. Like, it's like the whore is, but it's the deep earth womb. It's like that. It's like that very somatic womb. So whore. It's like the deep earth womb in cycle with the moon. That's what hormones means.
Mhm.
So it is, again, everything about a woman's body and a woman's experience and a woman's cycle is deeply mystical. And there always gets a point where you have to bring that into the conversation for the healing to happen. Because what I have discovered is that, and especially, when we're perimenopausal or menopausal, or, premenstrual, our hormones are like these dakinis or alchemists who are presenting us with our blocks and our contractions as an opportunity to open them and alchemize them and repattern, like, these pleasure pathways.
And when you talk about, like, I believe that sitting in pleasure is harder than sitting in pain
Yes.
for many of us. So how do we access more of that pleasure, more of that, like, that sensuality, that sacred pleasure, and opening that up? You had said a part of your practice was this breathing, and I know there's in
Yeah.
my sexual CPR program, we teach the fire orgasm breath, and there's
Yes.
that breathing to bring up orgasm again without touching,
Yes.
and that's super powerful.
Super
Um,
powerful. Yeah.
so what are some techniques that you teach or that you've incorporated?
So I think, one of the things that I have learned, and I've learned this just recently, is, um that we always have to be so in tune with what our capacity is right now and meet ourselves at the place that we are, and not look out into the culture or even past versions of ourselves and think, oh, I should be having this huge multi-orgasmic experience, or, you know, small and slow and sustainable is the way to go. And I had an example of this for me because I have a 5-year-old daughter. So before I gave, birth, before I was pregnant and I had to have a C-section, I could have like orgasms, like real like I differentiate between somatic orgasms and
You've
energy.
written about them
Yeah.
quite well.
So again, this like somatic and quantum, you can have like these energy waves that feel pleasurable or orgasmic, which are different to somatic orgasms, which are more localized but every bit as powerful. And I actually believe that it's like that is where a lot of the healing needs to happen for women. But so
I agree. I
yeah,
agree.
I used to be able to literally breathe and have full somatic orgasms, not energy
Wow. I'm
orgasm.
just gonna say I'm sitting here with a little envy right now.
I know. It was amazing, and because all that those nerve pathways there were so online, And then what I discovered after my C-section is they've been, and the fascia, because I actually believe that orgasm is a fascial event. And so we're just getting into the fascia conversation as women, as a culture. But again, the more your fascia is in the fluidity that it needs to be, and the pulsation it needs to be, the more you can experience these somatic orgasms, not just the energy ones. Um, but so since this experience, I have not been able to do that anymore because those pathways were cut in the C-section.
Well,
So
just so been studying that too, injecting procaine with ozone in those scar areas
yes,
can
yes,
help open up those
definitely. Well,
pathways.
you will love to hear this then. So I have had the needle therapy. This was in 2022. Every time I went and had the needling on my C-section scar, I would get my moon the next day.
Hmm.
And this might be after I'd not had it for like a few months. Like every single time that the needles were put in the scar and the fascia was loosened, the nerves were brought back online, my body would kick in with a cycle and all my hormones would regulate. So, but for me, so I've come from this interesting place where I've had kind of a very like advanced ability within my body to then, and after birth, it's like you're tired, you're exhausted, and you don't have
Completely.
time to be lying around doing like 3-hour pleasure um, practices after a cacao ceremony. I was like, have 10 minutes. so, so for
And you're
me,
in that, that maternal energy, like
yes, exactly.
split energy.
Yeah, and so for me, because I had a child older in my 40s, I had this convergence. I always say I feel like I've spent the last 5 years um, perimenopausal, postpartum, and premenstrual. It's
Yes,
been
and it's true, you're not alone with many women in their 40s
yeah,
that, postpartum goes right into perimenopause.
yeah, and it's intense. And you know what and I think just this is an addendum to this, because I think on a biological level, it makes sense to have children when you're younger, basically. but from a
I
s-
agree, having had one in my 40s myself. Yep.
yeah, but from a spiritual level, what I know is that my daughter wanted to come into a diamond womb, because
Um,
who I am now, I can hold the power and the structure for her in a way that I could not have done even 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. So I always say that about my daughter, like, but she's a dragon, she's a fierce Scorpio. And from when I was pregnant, I was always very clear about that she wanted to be mothered by a menopausal woman. Like she wanted that level of diamond precision. So I think there are always reasons for things, but I think on a somatic body level, it makes much more sense to do it when you're younger. But so what it's great because it's helped, it's made me go back to basics of
Mm.
like when I very first started my journey, like when I was 27, 28. And so it's made me have a lot more resonance with the women who are starting on their journey, which are like, where do I start? And
Right.
I've got a full-time job, and I'm a mom. I can't go to Costa Rica and do, like a retreat for a week. And so for me, I breathe every single morning, and I do it in bed. I don't even like get up and set up a sacred space and do it. I wake up and I breathe into my womb for like between 10 minutes to an hour, depending on the time I've got. And I do that every morning. And actually, like my husband supports me to do like that. The whole household is like, no, don't disturb your mom. She's breathing. Like everyone knows that if I've not breathed and done that breath work to start to move the energy, and then to also start to bring that undulation into your pelvis and your body, so that your spine and your pelvis is not just like this rigid static thing that, and however subtle it is, it doesn't matter if you're not in the place where you can be like doing these wild, it's just to allow, as you're breathing again, eventually as you're breathing, as the stuck energy starts to move, you feel a pulse, and then when you're in the pulse, eventually you start to feel the wave. And a way to think about it is so simple. It's like, imagine when you're with the guy that you love the most and turned you on the most, and you're kissing, what does your body do? It doesn't go like that. Your body starts to move in this wave of undulation. It's this wave, it's this preparation, the body, like she's going into this feminine fluid state that actually opens the fascia too, and opens the nervous system to receive pleasure. So I think to make a practice of that every single day is really important, even if it's just for 10 minutes. And then also another really great technique, and again, these are not like super advanced practices, but I actually feel like the small, slow, sustainable ones are the most important, that over time will spontaneously lead to those bigger experiences. But another one is just, on your mound of Venus, where your pubic hair is, to just put one hand on your heart and one hand there, because that area, without even having to go further down, because what I've discovered with a lot of women, especially if there's contraction, especially if there's a lot of emotion, even kind of getting more involved, it starts to bring up a lot and needs
Mhm.
more of a sacred container. But just holding that area, which is full of all these nerves that
Mhm.
connect into this area, so we know like the clitoris is like the rosebud is just like she's got a whole like mycelial network behind her. So to just place your hand on that, and your heart, and start to activate that and do the infinity loop. When I was pregnant, the moment I knew I was pregnant, I was in bed, and this incredible thing happened. It was almost like a surge of like fire, but not like hard fire, like the most soft, beautiful fire came up from my womb, and it felt like it caught light in my heart, and then it started to do an infinity loop. And I knew at that point that the baby had caught, like this is how a soul catches, comes into the womb, and then it kind of catches into the heart. But again, for women, synchronizing the heart and the womb, the feeling and the knowing, is so important, because so often as women, that's what has been disconnected. And what the heart can't deal with, we store in the womb. And that is why so often women don't don't want to go down there,
Mhm.
because it literally is opening this doorway to everything that their heart couldn't carry, and then they push down to store in the womb.
That's powerful. And so when you talk about that breathing with hand on your heart and hand on your pubic
Yeah.
area, you're and the affinity loop, are you breathing in both areas at the same time? Like, how
So
are you?
so how I do that is I just breathe and I just connect at first. Like, no, I'm just letting myself come back in. And then at a certain point, when I feel anchored and I think you kind of know it in your body, then I start to breathe the infinity loop, to start to really connect the energy wave of these two places.
So like
Because,
figure 8,
yeah, figure
internal, like being in
yes,
internal. Yeah.
exactly. And it's the way, and it's that acknowledgement as women, that it's like, again, our pleasure is connected to our feelings, is connected to our soul. And that may, for some women, that may not feel true for them, but that feels true for me, and that's felt true for so many women I know, and all the women I've worked with. And that's why, for women, kind of casual sexual encounters that don't have love or connection or a soul quality to them, um, don't tend to develop this ability to really embody this magical somatic feminine intelligence that is so healing, is so regenerative, is so it basically just plugs you back into God, whatever your concept of that is. And yeah, so it's like to really connect this, like, sensation, like pleasure at some level is sensation, and feeling, like emotion. So to connect those together and then let the energy flow. And what you find for a lot of women, before the pleasure comes, the grief comes, you cry.
Mm.
And they're beautiful tears. They're not like the kind of crying when you're upset and frustrated. They're like a return to your feminine somatic soul. It's like, my heart, my womb, like this sensation, this pleasure, and this feeling, this connectivity, this love, all merged together. And then often for women, we cry. And I always say, it's like, grief leads to pleasure and pleasure leads to grief, and that's another infinity loop. And again, I've seen this so many times with women, when they go into that deep grief in their body and their womb, at the end of it they experience ecstasy. They're crying, and at the end they're laughing, and they're like just in these huge ecstatic states. In the same way that sometimes, if you experience a really high level of pleasure and sensation, at the peak of that experience, your heart opens and then the tears come.
Mm.
This is like deep feminine soul work.
I completely agree. And in your book, and one of the reasons I wanted to talk with you about this too, and I forget which one, I've read all your books now. So, but you had shared a healing practice of releasing old sexual energies.
Mm,
And for those, about myself included, who have had been raped
mhm,
or, a non consensual
yeah,
sexual experiences, and healing from those
mm,
experiences and clearing that. And I love that practice that you teach. Can you talk about that too and why it's important from a genetic standpoint, from a physician, as a physician, with sperm is, has RNA, right? So we have genetic material as well as microbiome within that seminal fluid. And
yeah,
so there's this potentially held energy. And it's always made me very, very curious
yes,
about the metaphysical aspects of of that, of shared body fluids, let's say.
Yes, it's a huge thing, and this is like slightly to the side of, the way that as women, we are a library of the DNA that we've received, right? Okay, and once we start to understand that, we are more careful about the DNA we receive. But obviously, we've all experienced, many women have experienced moments where they've not had a choice from that. And I do believe the womb is supremely intelligent. She is the ultimate matriarch. She knows how to release those imprints. And that's a really powerful journey to go through. But then at a deeper magical level, this was always fascinating to me, that when you look back into magical legend, if you look in some of the sexual magical traditions, there is a tradition of men withholding their semen,
Mhm.
and people suggest that is because it helps their longevity.
Testosterone and everything,
Yeah,
yeah.
which I actually don't believe. So, but when you see, when you look back, the reason they did that is because there were once upon a time women who were so powerful, who had so much womb magic, that if as a man you left any DNA in them, they could control you.
That's
They
fascinating,
they
interesting
so
concept.
and so it's an interesting concept for me to think, and again, that sometimes as the feminine, we focus on the ways that we have been powerless, right? And the way that the feminine body feels like it could be a site for being a passive receiver of things, let's say. Whereas when we look all the way back to womb shamanism, what was known is that the womb is a very active, creative, magical being who has a lot of agency and control. And I think, and you may have more like of the scientific language for this, Anna, but as we're now seeing with the egg, when we get pregnant, it was believed that, like, these heroic sperm came in and penetrated the egg, and the winner the winner takes all. And now it's like, we don't think it happens like that. We think that the egg is this highly intelligent matriarch who is selecting who she allows in and kind of magnetizing them. So again, like our stories, even our biological stories, are shifting away from the woman's body as just this passive receiver, and returning her to her magic and her agency.
And the practice that you talk about to release those old energies,
Yeah. Remind me of what, because there's so
I
many
forget, I
practices.
know there's so many. I forget if it was in Womb Awakening or if it was in, the Magdalene Mysteries, but it was you had talked about it in the context of when you've had, sexual encounters, like, to clear those old sexual encounters
Yeah.
from your anatomy, to release them, is like imagining this dark liquid going into the earth again.
Yes.
Going resolving that and doing this from a space of grace and gratitude and
Yes.
love and forgiveness and compassion, and this, visualizing this kind of this black liquid, you know, returning to the earth type
Yes.
of experience, if I
Yes.
remember correctly.
Exactly. And I think that's, one of the points of that is, that's what menstruation does. That's why
Mhm.
menstruation is so powerful. It's like it's this opportunity to release old imprints before, we become fertile again for a new possibility. So, and I think with so these are the times, again, like there's an architecture of time. It's like, if you're in your menstrual years, you don't want to do a releasing practice when you're ovulating, right?
Mm,
Because that's a moment when you're opening to receive new imprints, new creations. But menstruation, or just before menstruation, is a really good moment. This is when the womb's intelligence is with you, to release these old imprints that you don't want, and to, yeah, visualize them, either being released in your menstrual blood back into the earth, or even doing rituals where you offer your menstrual blood back to the earth, and ask Mother Earth to transmute any imprints. Or you can imagine, whatever it is that you want to release as this kind of, um when you see it on a shamanic level, it's all often like this black, sticky, oily energy, in a kind of a magical sense, like to release that substance back to the earth, and release that imprint, because that's the power of the womb. I mean, this is what we write about in Womb Awakening. Literally, the womb is designed to release and reconceive. Like, she is regenerative. So whatever you have experienced doesn't have to live within you forever. There is this architecture for it to be released with grace, and supported, by the earth, by your own body, and then to come back into this state of like original innocence, like, able to generate a new reality, a new possibility, without holding on to that.
Mhm.
So I think that's, on a cosmologic level, that's the nature of the womb, is to rebirth things. So, again, in magical tradition, there is birth, which is the domain of the somatic feminine, and then there's rebirth, which is the domain of the quantum feminine, because now we're looking at things in a magical or energetic level.
Yes, and I think then with the sacred, like being able to reignite post-menopause in our enchantress
Yes,
stage of
yes,
life as we
yeah,
further work on our quantum feminine,
yeah,
this concept of reconnecting with our orgasm,
yes,
reconnecting with our pleasure. And from
yes.
there, it's creating so much creative energy.
And
And
maybe this is what will change the world, Anna, because how many like awakened womb quantum orgasms has the world been experiencing in the last 2000 years? Not many. But we're on the cusp of a new opportunity for all these women to awaken that aspect. And I think that could have such a powerful transformation on the world and the culture.
oh my gosh, definitely. Definitely it can. I could talk with you more about this. I know we're at our time for today, and I want to thank you so much for being so generous with your time and your wisdom. And your books are masterpieces. They really are. I've written 3 books myself, and
Well,
you've dug into so much research. And I wanted to just quickly touch, or if we can, quickly touch on the vulva. The
yes,
vulva being this magical and appreciated anatomy, like even from old caves and holy ceremonies and
yeah,
symbolic at places around the world in ancient traditions and wells and this
yeah,
concepts of this the sacred vulva. And I want to touch on this because I had a patient recently, and she didn't. I do executive physicals on all my patients. They
yeah,
come in from all over, and they spend a lot of money to come see me, and I do full head to toe. And she's like, nope, nope, I don't want any physical, definitely no pelvic exam, nothing's happening down there. I don't want, I'm like it's shut down. It is completely shut down, doesn't feel good. Don't want to touch it, talk to it, anything. I
yeah,
was like, okay, well, we'll revisit that the next time I see you. And when you're comfortable, absolutely. But it was so um, interesting to me. And I really specifically want her to reconnect with her womb energy, with her vulvar energy,
yeah, yeah.
and um and to appreciate her anatomy versus
Yes,
disconnect from it, and the
yeah.
ancient wisdom that goes with that, really as a holy, holy, holy aspect of
Absolutely.
ourselves.
Oh, the original church, the original church doors, the original portal, the gateway between the world. And I also just want to like differentiate, as in this sacred ceremonial site and journey, inside our womb is literally other world. It's the gate to spirit world. And as women, we will never touch the inside of our wombs. That is the mystery. There is this intelligence and, our cycle. But our vulva, the outside, we can touch this with our own hands and commune with it. And so this was like this mystical thing. There's the outer gates and then the inner church, and the inner church is always the mystery. It's the energy, it's the quantum, it's the spiritual. But then the outer gates, which is the vulva, it is where you worship, where you lay the flowers, you lay the praise, you touch with respect, you honor, you love, and I think that
And there's no age limit on that.
and there's no age limit on that. And of course we see with like Sheila gigs, it's like this sense of, the Sheila gig is um it's a old symbol that's found on churches in Ireland, and they're in Yorkshire too. It's of an old, like literally crone-like woman, like Baba Yaga woman, squatting, opening her vulva really wide, and it's above the church doors. And often these icons are heavily worn down because people touch the Shillinagig's vulva as a blessing before they go into the church.
Mm.
So, there's whole, layers of academic research on them, and no one really knows how they originated. But it obviously makes common sense that before we had like these man-made churches, people respected a woman's body as the gateway between the worlds. And then that's why a lot of spiritual practice was done in caves, because when you get those amazing caves with these entrances, it's the sense of the outer, the gateway between the worlds, and then the inner mystery, the inner spiritual realm. And again, that's where death, the rebirth rituals were done.
Ah, so powerful. Well, tell our audience how to connect with you.
So you can find me on Instagram at Seren Bertrand, or my website www.serenbertrand.com, or my Substack Enchantress of Elmet.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing your wisdom. And for my audience, I don't know what this is bringing up in with you. We've talked about very sensitive subjects today, and I honor that and honor whatever is coming up. And please communicate with me. Let me know how I can help you. Let me know if you want more conversations like this. And simply email team, TEAM, at drannakabeca.com, DRANNACABECA.com. And let me hear from you. I want to hear your comments, your questions, what's come up for you, how I can further support you on this journey into our enchantress self, into our, magi energy or magic. I still don't like the word crone. I can't just get it off
Yeah.
my lips, that word crone.
Yeah.
And so, but the symbolism of the energy wise, confident woman that speaks of her truth authentically and empowers others, sees the good in others, and are able to raise them up. And that is how we're going to change the world, with peace, love, and compassion. And it starts with our own self love and compassion, too. So please share this episode and give me your feedback. I look forward to it. And thank you so much for being part of the Girlfriend Doctor community. This is Dr. Anna Cabeca. Till next time.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Girlfriend Doctor podcast. Check out all the links below for more.